Hi, everyone. Thanks so much for joining. My name is Tessa Archibald, and I'm a policy associate for the Animal Welfare Institute, and I manage the Homes for Horses Coalition. Just a couple things to keep in mind as we get started. Please stay on mute so that we can hear our speaker clearly. And this will be recorded, so if you need to hop off or you want to share it, no worries. We're going to save questions to the end, but if you think of something, feel free to put it in the chat so that you don't forget it. Many of you joining today are members of the Homes for Horses Coalition, but for those of you who aren't, I'm going to share a short introduction. The Homes for Horses Coalition has been active since 2007, when it started as a unique coalition to help horse rescues and ultimately help equines by ending horse slaughter. Today, HHG is led by the Animal Welfare Institute and American Wild Horse Conservation and has over 500 members who are equine rescue directors, equine professionals, and equine advocates. HHG is dedicated to providing spaces for collaboration and connection within the equine rescue world, as well as furthering advocacy to improve the lives of equines through legislation and policy. Our guest today is the author of the new book, Unwanted: The Causes and Effects of America's Horse Population Crisis, Christina Keim. The book highlights a multitude of organizations within the equine welfare space, including multiple Homes for Horses Coalition members. I really appreciated this book for allowing everybody to speak for themselves and highlighting the different voices and perspectives within this world. We as the reader weren't told how to think and feel. We were really introduced to this issue through the lens of a lot of different organizations, including Homes for Horses. A little bit about Christina. She's an award-winning equestrian journalist. Her work has been featured in numerous equestrian publications, including Chronicle of the Horse, Practical Horseman, Plaid Horse, and more. With Sally Batten, she is the co-writer of The Athletic Equestrian and Equicide, and she is, of course, the author of Unwanted. For nearly 2 decades, she was a top collegiate hunter coach, and now she teaches compassionate horsemanship out of her farm, Cold Moon Farm in Rochester, New Hampshire. Thank you so much for joining us, Christina. I'm looking forward to hearing from you.
Yay. Thank you for inviting me, Tessa. Thank you for the introduction. I'm really looking forward to the opportunity to chat with this audience about my new book. I'm excited about the project. I'm really proud of the project. And my hope is that this book could be a tool for you to use to help educate your supporters, your stakeholders, the gatekeepers that you're interacting with in the work you're doing. This is my first opportunity to really speak to an audience of people who are already well versed in the complexity of caring about and managing horses at risk. And so I get to, I think, approach today's conversation from a slightly different perspective, which is great. Let me get this, oops, a Zoom fail already. Let me get my little presentation up. I always told myself I wouldn't be one of those teachers who couldn't use technology, and now I'm one of those teachers who can't use technology. So I guess you should be mindful of what you think as a small child. Um, again, thank you, Tessa, for that great introduction, and for sharing a little bit about me. Before we kind of get into a bit of information about the book, I thought it might be helpful to tell you all a little bit more about who I am and how I got to the point of putting this book together. So really who I am in the context of this project. So I wear 2 different hats professionally. I am a professional narrative journalist. And so, what a narrative journalist does is we tell the true stories of people, places, and events. But we really like to get kind of the story behind the story, if you will. We don't want to tell you just what happened and who it happened to. We want to get into the why of how it happened and the impact and the how and kind of how different events and influences and ideas came together to create a particular outcome. So a little bit different than a news reporter who is, just the facts, ma'am, just the facts, right? So, excuse me. So within this space, I do write a lot about horses and horse people. It's my passion. So I have written a lot about things in that realm. But some of you may be familiar with a series I write on a semi-regular basis for the Chronicle of the Horse called From Rescue to Ribbons. And this is a really fun project, and I'm going to throw it out there only because I'm always looking for suitable stories to tell in this space. But if you're familiar with the Chronicle of the Horse, it's got a very wide reach within the sport horse realm. And we like to tell the stories of horses who maybe found themselves in unfortunate circumstances, who were then rehabilitated, recovered, and found a new loving home where they were able to carry their new owner off into some competitive endeavor. And sometimes it's a very low stakes, low level competition endeavor. But I think this series is important because it helps to normalize that conversation about what it means to be a rescued horse, that a rescued horse is not necessarily broken or permanently injured or unusable, that rescued horses are horses that ended up with some bad luck and some bad circumstances, but they could be your next partner. So we're always looking for leads. So just kind of throw that out there. Um, when I'm not being a narrative journalist, I kind of jokingly call myself a multi-hyphenate equestrian professional. So I have basically been near, around, or on top of a horse since I was 8 years old. And I have just embraced anything to do with horses. So I've always lived in the northeastern corner of the US. My background is very heavily English riding based. So I'm fairly conversant in all the major English disciplines. I also love distance riding, both competitive and non-competitive. I have dabbled in Western. I have ridden in a Western saddle. It's just not my. I'm going to ask you to check my cinch for me if you want me to come join you in that tack. But I mean, if a horse is involved, I'm usually game. I want to be there and I want to be around them. And these photos are all of me on three of my most beloved horses of all time. They all happen to be competition photos because that's when I have people to take my picture. But most of the time, we're at home just enjoying the process and enjoying being companions and sharing time with each other. So, uh, what's sort of funny is that I was pretty adamant right through college that I was not going to be a professional equestrian, that horses were always going to be something I wanted to do, but I wanted it to be adjunctive to a different career. I actually studied environmental conservation, and I thought I was going to be teaching people how to care for marine ecosystems and marine life. I saw myself out on a whale watch boat, telling people about the plankton column and the whales and all that kind of stuff. And about a year out of undergrad, someone said, "Hey, so and so's looking for a live-in barn manager, and you can bring your horse." And I was like, "Well, I can do that for a couple of years." And there it went, right? So in the time since, I have done so many things in the industry. I've been a manager of facilities large and small. I've been a groom, a coach, a teacher, a trainer, a mentor. I have been a show manager, show secretary. I'm a licensed official. I've really kind of done all of those things that there is to do that pay a little bit of money to keep you going in the equine world. And I share this with you so you understand that as I got started on this project, I was coming into it with a lot of knowledge and experience in the industry in lots of different formats, right? Super grassroots to some super elite level programs and places. But I personally have never worked in what I would consider the space of rescue. So I write about it, I'm aware of it, but I have not done what some of you do every day, which involves managing nonprofits and taking in horses and doing those kinds of tasks. So that is kind of an important piece for you to understand that I came into this with a lot of knowledge and experience, but not necessarily the expertise that some of you have. Like probably some of you, I am the only horse person in my family. It started really young. Like I remember in nursery school wanting to be in the circus, the nursery school circus. I wanted to be one of the girls who did the trick riding on the horses. And I grew up in the suburbs. Like there is no good reason why I was so drawn to horses from such a young age. And again, I share this with you because inside me, there still is that little girl who just loves horses, right? That is integral to who I am. And even as someone who has been an equine pro, I take a little pride in the fact that the hardness of our industry, I feel, has not taken this piece away from me, that at the core, I just love horses and I want to see them live good lives and be well cared for and be appreciated for who and what they are. And that also colors my perspective as I go off into both the professional realm as an equestrian, but also as a narrative journalist. So, um, for about a little over 15 years of my professional career, I worked at a collegiate equestrian program, which is a really unique place to be an equine pro. And one of the courses I was responsible for teaching was for our seniors. And these were students who had either studied an animal science specific track or an equine studies specific track. So they had taken a fair amount of coursework in biology and some in business. Some of them were working within the equine assisted services realm, but they had a pretty academic study of the horse and a little bit of the broader industry. And in this class, I was trying to help them begin to make that mental transition that has to happen where a college student goes from being a student to being an emerging professional, right? So we know that someone who's just graduating with their undergraduate has more to learn, right? They're not necessarily an expert, but they're more of an expert than many other people are about whatever it is they've chosen to study, right? And you may be guilty of this too. I know I do this. Like, oh, so and so's daughter was a nursing student. Let's ask her this question about whether I should take Tylenol and Advil together, right? She probably knows the answer. You kind of make these assumptions. And so one of the things I would tell these students is, people in your extended network are going to know that you studied something with horses in school, and they're going to start asking you really funny questions. Like when they read a story that's in the New York Times about a carriage horse that collapses in New York City's Central Park, they're going to come to you and say, "Hey, what's up with that?" And they're going to expect you to have some kind of a well-reasoned and intelligent response, and also the ability to critically analyze whatever the information is that you're being presented with. So those are the kinds of questions we kind of dealt with in that class. And working with that population, and I hope some of you have the chance to do so, they tended to be, as a group, I'm generalizing a little bit, they tended to be very hopeful about their future, optimistic. They had really big goals for themselves about the impact they wanted to make in the equine space. And they can still be a bit idealistic. And those of us who've been kind of, out in the world a little bit, we know how hard the equine industry is. And we know that it can be a tough place to hold on to some of those values. But if you're going to find a niche that works for you in the horse world as a pro, I do think it's important to know what you stand for and where is your bottom, right? Like what can you tolerate? What is non-negotiable? Where is something more of a gray zone question, right? So you may have a belief, for example, that all horses should live on a track system, but you may work in an area of the country where track systems are not common, not practicable, not in vogue, whatever, and you may need to find a way to reconcile that belief with the way the horses in your area are being managed, and to try to maybe start to find where there can be some intersections between your core hope or belief or value and the way things actually are. So I was teaching this class. This is a lot of explanatory explanation, but I was teaching this class during the 06-07 period when the last US based equine slaughterhouses closed. I was teaching this class during 08 and in the following years of the Great Recession, when we started to see and hear lots of stories of horses that were being sent to different custodial organizations, potentially even abandoned in public lands and at boarding stables, et cetera. And so the conversation with these idealistic, soon to be graduating, emerging pros often would turn to questions around how do we handle this problem, right? Like what is right and just? And it was really fascinating for me to see students who had maybe gone through the same curriculum and had a somewhat similar background in terms of experience come to very different conclusions about what was a right or just way of handling this really complicated question. Um, and so in my efforts to support them in that, I started, kind of digging into what literature is available, what writing is available, what articles can I give them, what organizations can I direct them to, how do they separate what is maybe a social media myth from a more factual or accurate depiction. How do I process someone's first person account of something which is their lived experience but is not necessarily factual, right? This is what we do as a narrative journalist, right? This is part of our task, is to take people's true stories and then put them into some kind of a context that um, helps to ground it in some type of verifiable reality. So we spent a lot of time talking about that. I fairly quickly determined that there wasn't really one good source I could send students to. And further, there was a lot of information that for me was not verifiable enough, or not, it was very it was very it just simply was not a reliable enough source of information to draw a conclusion from it. It might inform you about someone's experience, but it wouldn't necessarily help you to understand facts around the problem. So I recognized that there was a hole here, that there was an opportunity to kind of fill this space. So this was kind of where the idea for what eventually became Unwanted began to percolate. It took me a bit longer to get around to actually doing it. This book represents over 5 years of research, spans the pandemic. So it took a while to put all those bits and pieces together. But I came to this project, again, looking at it through my lens as a narrative journalist, but also as a multi-hyphenate equestrian professional who recognized that I couldn't always separate fact from fiction and truth from sort of gray zone reality. And if I couldn't do that with all of my experience and background, what hope did a horse lover have? Right? Someone who just, like that little girl in the photo, loves horses, doesn't own one, doesn't ride them, just sees them in the field as she drives through town and goes, "Ah, I'm so glad there are horses in the world," right? And we know we have to care a lot about what those people think and feel about horses, because their perceptions and their actions influence what we do, and it influences policy that emerges around horses and horse care. Um, so I'm going to just read very short section for you from the book. This is from the introduction. I am pretty upfront with the reader about who I am and where I'm coming from and why I'm on this journey. I am a character in the book, if you will, as the narrator. So I do say I, and you know that I'm there in the room or I'm there in the space. And when I started this project, I had never gone to a livestock auction. I'd never been to one. I had heard about them, I'd read about them, I'd heard stories about them, but I'd never been to one. And so in the introduction, More Questions Than Answers, we start out with my first ever visit to a livestock auction in July 2019. So that's where we are. It is nearing 4 in the afternoon on the second Saturday of July 2019 when I turn into the gravel lot of the Lebanon Valley Livestock Auction in rural Lebanon, Pennsylvania. Just 6 miles off the interstate, the facility comprises several nondescript farm buildings, all covered with the same beige metal sheeting. One contains a country store, outside of which a hand-painted sign offers fresh-baked pies. To one side, a dozen or more horse and stock trailers are parked, attached to dusty towing vehicles. Mostly, these trailers are the hallmarks of professional haulers. Some are so long, I can't even guess how many animals could potentially be sandwiched into their interiors. To the left of the main buildings, I can see horses through a large doorway. They are packed closely, and I hear them calling. I have been told that for a first-timer such as myself, the Lebanon Valley sale is a good one to attend. It isn't quite as notorious as the New Holland auction, located 27 miles to the southeast in the heart of Lancaster County. To equestrians, the name New Holland is synonymous with last chances. According to some sources, at least a quarter of the animals running through its weekly equine sale end up on a truck bound for the United States border and ultimately a Canadian or Mexican slaughterhouse. Generally, it is said, the horses at Lebanon Valley are in better condition, of higher quality, and sell for decent prices, all of which can help keep them off the meat buyer's truck. Even so, horses from one sale sometimes end up at the other, and many of the significant human figures at each venue are the same. I am here to see this world for myself, to better understand the players, the dealers, the rescuers and activists, the regular buyers and the random bidders. And of course, to see the horses who find themselves traveling along a Mobius strip of an uncertain future. I've heard stories of auction horses that have endured horrible neglect and abuse, of animals so emaciated they can barely stand. I have read accounts of horses shipped thousands of miles from auction to auction, compressed into tight quarters on trailers so ill-suited for the species that many disembark with significant injury. I have heard that young, healthy thoroughbreds still wearing racing plates often show up at auctions on Mondays after failing to deliver at the weekend's meet. At the auction, lines between good and evil blur. A longtime equine advocate told me she thought I was very brave to come here alone. Her comment has spooked me enough that I park my car nose facing out for an easy exit. Although another individual familiar with the sale has reminded me that it is a place of business and I have as much reason to be there as anyone else. However, my vehicle is the only non-truck in the lot, and I feel acutely aware of my out-of-state plates. I carry nothing with identifying insignia, no logos of my own farm or other equine groups I am connected to. I've chosen to wear muted colors. My goal is to blend in. People who only know horses from television and the movies think they vocalize all the time. In reality, contented horses generally don't say much out loud. Theirs is largely a nonverbal language, one of posture and movement. Horses tend to only vocalize when there's something quite important at stake: socialization, food, or fear. As I hear the horses whinnying from the pens at Lebanon Valley, I have no doubt as to which biological imperative they are speaking. These are the unwanted. So after the introduction, I think you can hear in that I'm writing for horse people. I speak directly to horse people at several points during the book, but I also wanted this book to be accessible to an animal lover, a horse lover, again, the people that maybe are the ones who are willing to, or they'll make a donation to an organization, or they care about what happens to animals, but they aren't necessarily immersed in the industry, right? Because those people are part of our wider ethos. And so I kind of had to walk that line between explaining things that they might not know or understand intuitively, with not wanting to speak down too much to our equine savvy audience. But again, I also acknowledge that the experience I was having, particularly in this visit at Lebanon Valley, is one that many equestrians have never had. They've never put themselves into that place, and they've never experienced it. And so throughout this book, my goal was to take the reader on this journey with me, to have them experience what I was experiencing, see and hear and feel and smell everything that I was going through, so that they can live a little bit through my experience. So the book is divided into three parts. And after this introduction, where we spend the night at Lebanon Valley, and I introduce some of the major thematic pieces that will recur throughout the book, um, kind of dissecting in very broad strokes how and why a horse can end up essentially unwanted. We use that term, even though I appreciate it's not as popular in some facets of the work at this time, because it was so understandable to a non-equestrian reader, right? That was a really clear way of telling them a horse was at risk. They're like, well, at risk of what? It gets more complicated. So anyway, in part one, we get the chance to visit a whole bunch of different amazing organizations that are, every single one is doing some form of custodial work with horses at risk. There are small organizations, large organizations. There's a privately funded organization. There are others that are needing to actively work toward fundraising. They are boots on the ground people who are working within this space of caring for horses at risk. And so I went and visited a number of these different organizations and places, and met with their managers and executive directors and founders, and kind of got their stories, right? That true story about how this organization came to be, what its mission is, how that mission has evolved. I talked to them about some of the questions that again recur throughout this book. How do they see the horse? Do they see him as a livestock species? Do they see him as something other than livestock? We talked about where they see opportunities, where they see challenges, where have some of their biggest victories been, where are there liabilities, and do they think that at the end of the day this is a solvable problem, right? That we might someday get to essentially a net zero situation where the only horses requiring custodial care are the ones where, again, something has happened to an owner unexpectedly, and there isn't, it's the safe place for that animal to go and then be transitioned into his next home, as opposed to having to take in large numbers of horses that have suffered from acute neglect, acute or benign neglect, I should say, and other unfortunate circumstances of that nature. This section ends with a trip to New Holland. And I have warned folks who have talked to in other settings that chapter 4, which is the visit to New Holland, chapter 4 is the one where you want to carve out a little niche of time, get your box of Kleenex, get your favorite comforting hot beverage, and I want you to read it from start to finish, and then put the book down and go take a walk in the sun, or hug your kid, or pet your dog, whatever it is, to reground yourself. Because again, what I wanted the reader to experience was a bit of the visceral experience of being there. Tessa and I were chatting before we got started today about how hard it is, and again, so many of you live this, but how hard it is for horse lovers, whether they're closely connected to the industry or not, to see horses suffering and to know that it happens. And it's so much easier to look away. than to look it in the eye and say, okay, we've got a problem here and we need to do something, right? So the arc of part one is intended to help the reader understand that there are different viewpoints about what should happen to horses that end up in these situations. And there's no easy answer, right? There's no one single solution or one single answer that's going to resolve the question. Um, At the end of part one, I borrow a quote from Allie Baker, who is the founder of Home at Last Rescue, which is one of the organizations I visited in part one. And she said, you got to go upstream, right? You got to go upstream. So in part two, we go upstream and we speak to groups like Homes for Horses Coalition and the ASPCA and the American Horse Council, and then their subsidiary groups, the United Horse Coalition and Equine Welfare Data Collective, and we look at what does the law say about livestock? Why are horses livestock? Why do many consider that a good thing? What are the liabilities about being considered livestock? What does the data say? The EWDC has been doing some pretty amazing work in collecting data from your groups so that we have actual hard and fast numbers and figures to be able to understand what is the capacity for our custodial organizations, what other services and supports are available to groups, what kinds of creative and amazing solutions are being thought of at this high level, this 10,000-foot view, if you will. Different types of safety net programs, different types of support programs, different kinds of owner education programs, all designed to try to get at aspects of this unwanted horse crisis, right? So one thing I will share with you in discussing the book with other readers, and again, some of these are people who are not as intimately connected, the information about the fact that there are safety net organizations that provide short-term funding has been kind of a mind-blowing piece of information for many readers. Like really interesting feedback, because in conversation with some of the groups that offer that service, they will say sometimes, we need to get that word out, right? We need to make sure that people, horse owners, the people who are struggling are getting this information. And so again, here we have an opportunity to normalize that conversation among the equestrian community, and just to make it a known fact that if an owner ends up in a tight circumstance, there is help, there is support available, and we might be able to keep that horse out of a custodial situation and with their loving home if the problem is something that's short term. So that's been a really interesting piece of feedback that I've gotten from people, that was something a lot of readers were not aware was even out there. So once we get through that, I kind of jokingly call part two the academic section. And then once we get into part three, my goal is to spotlight, and there's so many of you to be spotlighted, but what I wanted to showcase was different ways in which different types of organizations have found creative and innovative solutions to some of the problems and aspects of this complex web of challenges. So in my opinion, helping horses at risk is not about doing one single thing. It's about doing a lot of things. There are lots of threads in this knot. And if we are going to untangle it, we need to do it thread by thread by thread, right? So we have a whole chapter about aftercare, thoroughbred aftercare, the rise of thoroughbred aftercare, which I find to be an incredibly inspirational success story of how a particular aspect of our industry realized they had a major PR problem. They were losing fans. They were hemorrhaging fans because those horse lovers cared about what happened to the horses, and they didn't like what they were seeing. So they maybe got a little bit forced into it, but they took action, and they've made amazing strides in planning for the arc of a horse's life beyond just their racing years, right? That is now more of the norm in the industry as opposed to the exception. Is there work to be done? Of course, but it doesn't take away from what has been accomplished there. And in my mind, that is a model that other aspects of the industry should be thinking about, right? That a horse who has a performance career will not have a performance career forever. So, what are we going to do next? What comes next? We can't just be thinking about the moment now. We need to be thinking further down the line. We hear some really amazing stories of programs that are helping horses to overcome and heal from neglect, from rough starts. We are hearing stories of partnership between horses and humans, youth at risk, veteran groups, incarcerated people, and how some of these horses are helping these humans to heal. And I kind of make the case that for many horse lovers, resuming equine slaughter in the US will never be an acceptable solution because the American public no longer sees the horse in that way. They see him as some kind of a partner or healer, and that's not the ending that those kinds of animals receive, right? So that is the basic arc of the book. I mean, there were so many stories to tell. I could probably write part 3 4 more times and still not get to the end of all the stories. So if your organization's not in there, please don't take it as anything other than I live in the Northeast and I needed to work with groups I could reach. So physically reach is part of it. So what I'd like to just kind of wrap my babble up here with is just a little short excerpt. This is actually from the afterword. So after I've taken my reader on this whole journey and through the transformation, this is the message I wanted to leave them with. One of hope that this is a problem that we have amazing people working on, but it can't be untangled without everyone's support. So if you'll just indulge me a moment here. Horses, in their majesty, strength, and grace, inspire powerful emotions. You don't have to be an equestrian to admire them, and the unique and intertwined history of our two species, horse and human, dictates a far deeper connection than what we hold with many other non-human animals. Unfortunately, direct access to horses and equestrian educational opportunities is becoming harder to come by in many areas across the country. The importance of activities like Hidden Pond Farms Camp Desperado or the Glen Eyre and Brook Hill equestrian programs cannot be overstated. Not only are they helping horses, they are giving young people the opportunity to become compassionate, empathetic, and responsible members of society. Without compassion for others, we are all lost. The realm of equine-assisted services, including hippotherapy, recreational therapeutic riding, equine-assisted learning, equine-assisted psychotherapy, and more, is proving to be just the solve many wounded souls need. From trauma victims to the disabled to veterans, working with horses is turning feelings of adversity and otherness into success and capability. Certainly, the veterans at Mission Mustang will tell you about the horses who changed their lives, as will the formerly incarcerated people who participated in the Thoroughbred Retirement Foundation's Second Chances program. Though not strictly equine-assisted service programs, each serves as a model for how interacting with horses makes people's lives better. In my work as a narrative journalist, I have profiled dozens of equine-assisted service programs, and nearly to a one, they share that they are fully enrolled with a healthy wait list. Often, participants have no previous experience with horses when they come to one of these programs, but the general public is learning about the horse's capacity to heal humans. When you become intimately aware of just how profound a connection with the horse can be, it becomes impossible to tolerate the idea that these animals should be subject to conditions denying them the 5 freedoms. Yet within the equine industry itself, there are still those among us who would turn a blind eye to the fact that we have more work to do in this regard. If we want to ensure that no horses end up unwanted, we must use our considerable collective knowledge, skill, and wisdom to make the best decisions possible for each individual animal at every step of that animal's journey. What does this look like? I don't profess to have all the answers, but I would offer you this. It will require a cultural shift across the industry from the grassroots up. I expect it will look like everyday horse lovers, people like you and me, saying enough. Each of us has the ability to make simple changes in how we think about a horse's life and well-being to effect powerful change. It starts with doing better for the individual horse or horses we care for or love or admire. In speaking with the many sources whose stories have appeared in these pages, one consistent theme emerged: hope. Despite what might at times seem like insurmountable odds, the advocates, rescuers, lobbyists, executive directors, trainers, owners, horse lovers you have met in Unwanted are all operating from a belief that we can make a difference. We can change things for horses at risk or in transition, but it will take each and every one of us setting aside gross differences and coming back to the one fundamental core value we share. We each love the horse. My fervent hope is that after reading these stories and pondering the questions raised, you too will believe that you can make a difference for horses. It is not my place to tell you what that first step looks like. I only ask that you be willing to take it. So, in speaking with you today, my hope is that you will feel a little bit of inspiration from some of the work I've done here and possibly see the value in sharing a book like this, again, with your supporters, with your stakeholders, with the people in your broader web of connections who needed that extra, they need that extra bit of information. They need that understanding of the complexity of the unwanted horse or the horse at risk web, right? So that they can better understand what their place might be within it. So the book is available now. It is published by Trafalgar Square Books, who I will say are our main publishers of equine themed titles. So it's always wonderful. You can support them directly, but it's also available Barnes and Noble, Amazon, or anywhere books are sold, as they like to say. So um, so that actually concludes my presentation.
Thank you so much, Christina. I really appreciated that overview, and I have read the book, but I think that that was an important opportunity to reflect on it as a whole. And I think the readings that you chose, really highlight those themes. And again, I think it's a really unique book and that it does bring together so many different voices, maybe sometimes voices that aren't in the same rooms or, you know, don't have the exact same nuanced perspectives, but as you mentioned, the same end goal, which I think is really important. Does anyone
I
have
will.
any questions? Oh, go for it. And
That's
we'll
what I was just going to say. When as I was working through this, I'm certainly aware that the different missions of different groups can put people at odds with one another, which I think is unfortunate because I think we need to be kind of steering the boat in the same direction, if you will, and those sometimes those big differences are really critical and they can be an obstacle, but on a more basic level, sometimes we just need to be moving in the same direction and supporting each other's work and appreciate that there are going to be differences in what we see as the final outcome, but we're moving in the same direction. We're all on the same path together.
Yeah, definitely. That's something that, I really value about Homes for Horses is that it does bring together so many different organizations that, as you said, may have, different missions, but can support each other's work, can be in the same space, and recognizing that that shared goal is what's most important. We have a lot of black screens with names. Does anybody have any questions or anything before we hop off? Comments? Have you read the book? Kathleen, I know you read the book.
Hi. Yes, I'm almost done with it. Actually, I still have a couple more chapters left, but yes, I have been drooling over this book. And I've shared it with my group as well. Yeah, I am a big fan of all the different modalities and thoughts coming together in the same cause, just like you talked about. I have a million questions always, but they're small and significant in their own way. But I won't waste everyone's time. Just it was really, really good, and I'm steering everyone I can towards it so that they can get all the ideas that I've gotten from it.
I appreciate that. Thank you.
All righty, we have a quiet bunch, but I'm sure folks will reach out to me, to you, if they do have any further questions and if they're interested in securing the book for themselves. So thanks so much for being here, Christina. Nice. Thanks so much for your comment, Tara. Thanks everyone so much for being here, and we'll let you get on with your afternoons, but thanks again for attending and for supporting Homes for Horses. Bye-bye.
Thank you, everyone.